And to some observers, Indo-Pakistan diplomacy has mostly focused on conflict management rather than conflict resolution. What diplomats are involved in, keeping the larger picture in view, is fighting the fires, managing the furies, rather than in looking for long-term sustainable solutions with good neighborliness. So the nature of diplomacy has also changed. In the initial years, there used to be a great deal of personal cultural intimacy between diplomats on both sides. And this continued till the 1970s. But in later times, it was professionals pitted against each other, which was overall a positive thing. So there has been space for quiet diplomacy, for the traditional and classical secret conversations away from the public glare. But this is reduced in current times because in the age of social media scrutiny, everything needs to be shared real time, particularly in the relationship like India-Pakistan. And quiet diplomatic maneuvers become rare, not least because they are harder to pull off. So more importantly, the public postures of populist politicians, they shrink the space further. And for instance, Imran Khan, when was a populist politician and very active in Pakistan, when I met Imran Khan, he said very positive things about the India-Pakistan relationship. But when Article 370 happened and we took that decision, he painted himself into a corner saying, we will not talk to India until India reverses that position. And he takes a very strong public position that made it very hard for Pakistan. They have, of course, reversed that position now. So there's been a lot of this Punjabi bonhomie in the diplomacy, this what some people call Jhappi Pappi diplomacy, that you go and speak in Urdu, Punjabi, and so on. But one particular diplomat, Ricky Jaipal, and I quote him in my book, he was from Tamil Nadu, and he said, look, he identified himself as a Madrasi who doesn't speak Punjabi. And the Pakistanis actually respected that because he said, you know, you're not laying claim to us in any way. You're dealing with us like a foreign country. And this is what they prefer to do. In the 78-year relationship, 4 wars, several minor skirmishes, we still find there is room for diplomatic diplomacy, diplomatic creativity. So I've pointed out to several larger-than-life diplomats in my book. P.N. Haksar was Indira Gandhi's advisor and counsel all through the 1971 war. And he made her look taller, better. He was giving her great advice. Also, 1971 was perhaps the finest hour for not just India's military, but also for India's diplomacy. Because what 3 key diplomats played an important role. Haksar was guiding Mrs. Gandhi in Delhi, guiding her into things like signing the Indo-Soviet Treaty, not being overly concerned about China. There was Brijesh Mishra, who was a diplomat in China. He famously interpreted Mao's smile. Mao smiled at him in 1970, and he could, that was an oversimplification, but he could report that the Chinese will not step into the 1971 war. And there was D.P. Dhar in Moscow, who was working on the India-Soviet treaty. So there was a great deal of scope for diplomacy. Even in current times, my own tenure in Pakistan, 2017 to 19, in case you didn't know, I was booted out of Pakistan. I was expelled finally because of Article 370. But I found that there was space for conversations. And during Pulwama, for instance, I did become a crisis communication channel. I recount the story in my book on the 27th of February, after Pakistan was worried that India would be launching missiles. I get a call at midnight on behalf of Imran Khan from the High Commissioner of Pakistan to India, who was then in Islamabad, saying that my boss wants to speak to your boss. So Imran Khan wanted to speak to Modi on various things. And I checked with my colleagues, and I don't mention in my book who I checked with, and I said, okay, you can, my prime minister is not available, give me the message. So the point is that in tough relationships, it is important to have diplomats in place, because you could manage a crisis on the spot. Again, after the crisis of Pulwama and Balakot, I was back in Pakistan and could have some very frank discussions with the Pakistanis on what India's asks were about terrorism, what we'd like them to do, whether we talked about giving us 26 Indian passport holding terrorists that they were sheltering. But these conversations are not easy to have if you don't have diplomats in place. Again, not every policy question gets escalated to a senior political level, and there is a great deal of local creativity that you could use. So one of the issues before I went to Pakistan was, what would be the optics of my meeting with the Pakistan Army Chief? And I was told it won't be great. But my then Foreign Secretary, which happened to be Dr. Jaishankar, told me use local creativity, which is a license to do something short of being photographed with the Army Chief. So I had various proxies and various conversations. And often the diplomacy in these tough relationships is on both sides. So every 2 months I was coming here, meeting the Indian Prime Minister, giving him some messages, meeting the National Security Advisor, Duval. So diplomacy is important and perhaps even more required in difficult relationships. So, which brings me to the fourth big picture point I wanted to make for you, which is that global forces matter. The global major powers have played an important role in India-Pakistan relations. We often prefer to deal with a lot of issues bilaterally, but global forces have mattered. So South Asia was sometimes a playground for the superpowers, as the US used every playground in the world to contain what they felt communist China, communist Soviet Union at different points. And, particularly in the 21st century, I think we've seen a major churn and major rethinking on how the major powers want to deal with this area. But major powers are pursuing their global interests, and that impacts us. They will privilege their interests over India's interests, and that we should be clear about. For instance, right at the creation, it was the British national interest that decided the fate of India and Pakistan. Britain was fatigued by the Second World War. Britain saw Pakistan as a country that would be more amenable to pursuing or helping or forwarding British interests in terms of oil, in terms of keeping away the communists, than Nehru's India, which was seen as socialist inclined, and the British were not very sure India would play a major role in keeping the Russians away. So subsequently, in the US and Russia fighting the Cold War, which made them choose partners, the Chinese came into the play in the 1960s. They aligned with their adversary's adversary after 1962 very closely with Pakistan. So what was a strategic alliance of two countries which had a common adversary over a period of time has become a dependence, an abject dependence of Pakistan on the Chinese for their nuclear program, their military program, their air power, and now even their economy. So this is again a situation that we face, and we saw a Sino-Pak battlefield play out for us. Fortunately, we did much better than them, but that is a reality we have to be aware of. Now, the Cold War between the US and Soviet Union has also morphed into a new one in the 21st century in Ukraine. It's become a broader one between Russia and the larger West, and it is accompanied by a new contestation between the US and China. For some scholars, the new era is one of South Asia seeing a revival of what we call big power geopolitics as the US tried to withdraw from the region. Remember, the US was in the region in Afghanistan from 2001, right after 9/11, to 2021 August when it left. But even now, the US sees some benefit of some capacity, and which is why it cultivates Pakistan to get some ability to deal with Afghanistan, and particularly the CENTCOM, which is the Central Command of the US Army, finds it useful to be part of this theater, despite a completely changed relationship with India, which is a strong strategic partnership. China has deepened Pakistan's dependence, and therefore India's concerns of a two-front or a single-front war is very real. But Pakistan also continues to woo the US. It's part of their strategic culture. So leveraging everything from strategic location to cryptocurrency to mining rights. And hence, you saw this month the Field Marshal's lunch at the White House with a very transactional US president. Now, for military experts, the other issue that has changed is the power differential between India and Pakistan. This has widened and will continue to do so. And when the military differential widens, what does Pakistan do? It looks for external alliances in order to strengthen itself because it feels it's more vulnerable to, and also it becomes it will use either sub-conventional means like terrorism, but it will also look for global partners to match India's strength, which in GDP terms is now more than 10 times Pakistan's. So when we're talking of foreign forces, the multilateral bodies have also played a major role. Aside from the major powers, the UN has tried since its inception to facilitate the India-Pakistan territorial issue. Just as the World Bank mediated the waters, and this is now being contested by India. We do say since 1971, since the Shimla Agreement, that we have moved strategically to a space of bilateralism. We will deal with Pakistan directly, and we don't want either mediation or bodies, but there is a certain degree of flexibility here. India will continue to use bodies like UN Security Council, the Human Rights Council when necessary. India will not shy away. And after being wary of internationalizing, quote unquote, the Kashmir issue because of years of propaganda by Pakistan, what India is showing is now confidence and flexibility in approaching, say, the International Court of Justice for imprisoned citizens, or the Financial Action Task Force for putting the pressure on Pakistan on terrorism, the Civil Aviation Organization ICAO for aviation disputes, and now India will probably engage with the World Bank to amend the Indus Waters Treaty, which will be part of the new normal. So traditional multilateral instruments like the IMF and newer ones like the Financial Action Task Force will be able to put more intense scrutiny on Pakistan, modify its behavior in different ways. And my view would be that, in a sense, India should not be too concerned if Pakistan gets integrated into Western structures, because there is a certain Western leverage then on Pakistan, vis-a-vis a situation that it becomes a complete vassal state of the Chinese, a complete dependent state on the Chinese, gets isolated from the world. So there is some way of modifying the behavior. Which brings me to the fifth and final theme, which is that our policy towards Pakistan now, for the last few decades, is fundamentally a counterterrorism policy. And that is because after the proxy warfare of the 1980s in Kashmir in the 1990s. The hope was that Pakistan would not try to assert sub-conventional superiority when it gained nuclear parity in 1998. So if your primary concern is that I want to be India's equal, you've got that parity in the nuclear domain because you've got those weapons of deterrence. But the opposite happens after 98. In 99, we get Kargil. In 2001, we have terrorism in our parliament. So what happens is that Pakistan attempts this territorial revisionism in Kargil and sub-conventional warfare under the nuclear umbrella. And subsequently, in nuclear times, we've seen spectacular acts of terrorism, 2001, 2008 Mumbai, 2016 Uri, 2019 Pulwama, and now 2025 we've seen this again play out in Pahalgam. But what it has done is made the India-Pakistan relationship heavily securitized, not just because of the four major conflicts, but because of the everyday unfolding ones. And again, this is something where we have the relative importance of themes like ideology, territory, security, but now Pakistan's quest for security by portraying India as a dangerous neighbor which can attack it, and this is what the Pakistan army would like to tell its people, and India's own lowered threshold of terrorism makes this a very securitized relationship, which means that bilateral diplomacy will keep security issues at the center of the grand strategy that the two countries will have for each other. So both countries accept that security is the dominant concern, and therefore what we've seen is that terrorism in the last 3 decades has derailed the détente processes. Many in India believe that Pakistan should now be approached, and I am one of those, with a policy of active defense to counter terrorism. So India's Pakistan policy has to be a counter-terrorism policy rather than a policy, say, for the rest of South Asia, which is neighborhood first. And the acts of terror over the decades, particularly in the 21st century, have each time set the dialogue as and when it was taking place back by a few months. And this is often, the acts of terrorism were often timed to major meetings between the two, meetings between Vajpayee and Nawaz Sharif, for instance, and Modi and Nawaz Sharif, which becomes an additional disincentive for India's politicians. Why should I go to Pakistan and attempt a grand reset if what I'm going to get in return is possibly a higher probability of a huge terrorist attack? So again, this is something particularly true because now the distinction in India's mind between a Pakistan-based terrorist group and the army has gone away. So this is again what we have, a situation where we have terrorism as a central point in the conversation. And again, more importantly, and this will be my last point, what we have is that the strategic restraint that India had exercised after the nuclear, after going nuclear in Kargil in 99, in 2001, after the parliament attack, it's replaced now by a more sophisticated counter-terror and active defense policy. I would make the counterfactual argument that if we had used this kind of military power in the 80s in Punjab, after Punjab, in the 90s after Kashmir, in the 2000s after the various attacks, we could have deterred some of the violence that we faced. So a Balakot or Sindoor-like strike after Mumbai would have prevented perhaps more attacks subsequently and would have at least put a high cost to Pakistan for this behavior, to the Pakistan army for this behavior, if not acted as a deterrent. So what I have tried to present to you is what, in my view, are the five key issues. An identity crisis in Pakistan that inflames the relationship, even though diplomacy and external powers play a role. But now the key deal breaker in the relationship is terrorism, and the relationship cannot really progress in a positive direction until this is handled squarely. So, which brings us to the final question, that can the future be different from the past, or how can it be different from the past? I'm going to skip some of the detailed ideas, but just end by saying that this relationship has seen a lot of disruptions. It's seen anger, it's seen diplomacy, it's seen disruption, and it has also seen several moments of hope. So it's not a relationship that can be solved or resolved with one magic bullet, one summit, one handshake. It must be managed patiently, firmly, strategically. Diplomacy still matters. So does deterrence. And so does clarity. We need to be clear about our objectives. We do not want to solve the Pakistan problem once and for all. What we want is for Pakistan to stop being revisionist, stop exporting terrorism to India, and that would be our limited objective. And perhaps what we can best aim for is managed hostility, and in time, cold peace. And so I would say the way to deal with Pakistan is through strategic patience and through military strength. It's not a choice between the alternative options of deterrence, containment, or engagement, but it's a combination of all three. Let me stop there. Thank you very much.